Cool.
So do I need to let people in?
Yeah, when they come
Yeah.
in.
And it'll just pop up here.
Uh-huh.
They'll say someone has joined the waiting room.
Okay.
Then
Yeah.
hit
You're getting what, like a
accept.
handful that are coming in through Zoom every day, every time?
Now that it's summer, it's gonna be interesting to see what the attendance is. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Okay, you're welcome.
You guys are awesome. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started this morning. No one's in attendance, no one's online, but I'm gonna go ahead and start. Let's start with our gratitudes. We're gonna take a few minutes to write down what we're grateful for. What we accomplished yesterday, what was our victory, and we're gonna put down what our big rock is for today. I'm gonna put on some music to listen to while we do that. Okay. Yeah, gratitudes. So one victory from yesterday, 3 gratitudes for today, and what's your big rock? What is it that you want to accomplish today to move your work forward? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Then we'll start. Started. Thanks for coming.
Out of the class.
So, any victories from yesterday?
Yeah, so I went under contract, my listing. And I guess it's technically victory 2B, but we're gonna be signing another buyer broker agreement, so that'll be good,
Yeah, good.
yeah.
Did you come to terms on their purchase with the seller finance deal? Did you come to terms on a seller finance on the other one?
Up for which one? Because
Valley View?
Valley View, we're finishing up those terms.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't quite gotten there, but every time we call them, they keep saying they're excited to do the seller financing. They just need to talk to a third party that they have something going on with. So we'll figure that out, but
Yeah.
I'm still hopeful.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. That's great. Well, I wanna talk with you after the meeting about, that little project we got going on,
Yeah, of course.
with the SOI and all that. I wanna change things up a little bit. In a good way, I think.
So,
Any gratitudes for today?
I'm grateful for AC.
Yeah.
It's
I'll
funny.
get it.
Nope, it's funny how when you lose something, you
Oh.
become grateful for it.
Yeah.
So we most likely will go all summer without the AC, but we're being creative with fans, and so that'll be fun.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that we have a roof so that we're not like out in the sun all day.
Yeah.
And I'm also grateful for popsicles and garden hoses.
Yes.
Yes, it was fun
That's
yesterday.
great.
Yeah.
That worked. Cool everybody off.
Yep.
Well, I got clarity on some SOI stuff. That's why I want to talk to you about changes. I've been thinking about that, and I think it'll be good to make some changes there. I'm grateful for, and I mentioned this yesterday in our staff meeting, but this week I went to the doctor and I have a little mini physical twice a year. I'm grateful for the doctor that I have. He's just such a great person, and I generally believe he cares for me and my health, and it's good to have a nice partner that way. I'm grateful for the weather. The weather's been awesome. I don't know if I'll be able to say that on Monday once it hits 95 degrees, but yeah, I'm grateful for that. My big rock today is to close a commercial land deal that I have that's 2 weeks late in closing, and I think we're gonna close that today. So that's a big rock for me, is to get that closed and off the books and get my seller happy. So, yeah. How about you? Big rock for today?
Yeah, that big rock is to get that buyer broker agreement signed before our clients come tomorrow from Idaho to look at properties.
Are you meeting with them tomorrow then? Good.
So fun.
Good.
And then with that same rock is finishing contacting essentially all the agents with the same price range of houses that we're gonna see to see if they'd be willing to sell their finance. Or a lease to own.
Good. Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'll be good for you, that particular client.
Yeah, we found 2 that are for sure yes, willing to do it.
Uh-huh.
And so far 4 that are maybe, and only 1 that was outright no. So we'll see.
Okay, good. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the topic for today. So today we're going to talk about 1031 exchanges. And there's a lot of misconception out there about 1031 exchanges.
Do you want to admit? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Huh?
When I started in the business, I heard, 1031 exchange, you don't want to do that. And you don't want to do that necessarily because you don't want to give any more of your money up to the government than you have to, right? But a lot of misconceptions about, it's 35% of the sales price or 50% of the sales price. And that's just not true. I mean, there's ways to kind of manage the 1031 and to try to make that as least painful as possible. Where we get 1031 is that it's derived from the Internal Revenue Tax Code. So the code of the IRS is section 1031 of the IRS code. So that's where we get the 1031 from. And in that code, it talks about like-kind exchanges when it comes to real estate. So there's two times that the 1031 exchange applies in real estate. Number one is if you have a residential property and you live there for less than 24 months. That's the key. With the residential real estate, it's a time thing. If you stay there 20 months or a year or 18 months, you could potentially owe capital gains. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to stop people from buying a residential property with the nomer that it's a residential property, but their true reason to buy it is to buy it and flip it and make it an income property. So that's why the time constraint on residential property. So if you buy a residential property, have to sell it because something happens, you have to get relocated, there's a death in the family, a health situation. You could own capital gains on it, but there again, if there's a life event when it comes to you and owning residential real estate, then often that life event will help you with capital gains. In other words, capital gains may not be owed if you can prove that it was a life event. You got relocated, somebody died, a divorce, anything that would cause a major life event. Now that would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And obviously, if you're looking at a situation, either residentially or commercially, where capital gains tax may apply, obviously you're going to want to hire a tax professional. Get you a CPA that has experience with 1031 exchanges, and have them help you with that, because there's some documents that need to be filled out and evaluations that need to be done. I'll give you a case in point. So several years ago, I bought a house that was on the Oak Ridge Golf Course in Farmington, and we bought it, and I just didn't like it. I didn't like the noise. It had a very hard yard for me to take care of, and I was very busy. It sat on a creek, and I had to, anyway, it just didn't work out. So we ended up selling the property after we'd been there 20 months. And I knew that I was going to owe capital gains. And I knew I was going to sell it for a profit, because when I bought it, it was kind of a distressed property. We put a lot of money in it. We painted it, we carpeted it, we changed flooring. I took a garage that had two separate openings and made it into one big opening, because we had an SUV, and that pillar in the middle of the doors was problematic. So we spent a lot of money. I think it was $40,000 or $50,000 fixing this house up. Well, when I went to sell it, and I was looking at paying capital gains, you can subtract any of your improvements during the period of time that go in the house from the gain. So I was able to subtract those improvements to the property, plus the gain was prorated. My accountant prorated my gain. So instead of owing an entire gain, I only owed 4 months worth of gain instead of 24 months worth of gain. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys, but it ended up being like 1/6 of a gain instead of the whole gain. So I did end up paying capital gains, but it was hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars because of the way we were able to structure it. Any questions on that?
I do. So, for example, someone who does flips, right?
Mhm.
Their prorate would be way different because they bought it essentially like a month, and then maybe 6 months down the road, they're selling it again, right?
Yep.
So would it then be prorated
Didn't
to,
have a whole gain
they'd have a whole game?
because they bought it with the intent of making money.
Okay,
So it's a totally different animal. I didn't buy that house with the intent of making a gain. I just couldn't stand to live there. So we decided to sell it and move somewhere else. So it's a little bit, so the gain was prorated, and I ended up paying a little bit of gain. But if you're buying and flipping houses, that's a business. So that would fall under this portion of the tax code that says that you're gonna have to pay capital gains on your profit in flipping those houses. Now, can they subtract costs and different things? Yeah, they can do that as well, to try to get that gain down. And so they can take advantage of some of those loopholes in the system as well. But if you're gonna buy a house, flip it, make $100K, your profit, you're gonna end up paying capital gains on that 100K, after your expenses.
makes sense.
So, yeah. So there's that part of it. So there's the residential buy and flip kind of thing. Then you get into the purpose of buying property, and it can be residential property, which is an income generating property. That's the definition of a commercial property, or a property that would be for sure underneath the 1031 tax code. would be an income property. So if that property is generating income for you, so it's a single family home that you bought and you're renting out, or you bought it and you're living in the top and you're renting the basement out, you're kind of treating it like a duplex, that would be an income property. So when you sell that, that would fall under the 1031 tax code. A duplex, a fourplex. So up to a fourplex is considered residential property. Anything over a fourplex is considered commercial property. So a sixplex or more, or if it is a commercial property by zoning, it's a commercial building, an industrial property, you know, those are all commercial properties that the sole purpose of that property is to generate income, right?
Right.
So it would fall under the 1031 tax code. Do we have any questions up to this point?
So commercial and residential would be treated differently when it comes to 1031.
Yes, to a certain degree. Yeah, if you're buying residential properties for the purpose of making money, then it would be basically the same. If you have a life event, then that life event is going to be taken into consideration. And there's some different guidelines based on that, just like with my case, we prorated the gain and different things like that. And if you have a life event, then there would be no capital gain, as long as it's a qualifying event. Those qualifying events are death, divorce, those kinds of things.
Job change.
Yeah, job change, job loss, those kinds of things. So, yeah. So when you have a client that is maybe looking at a 1031 exchange scenario, whether it's a residential property that they've rented or they're flipping, you need to be able to help navigate them through that process. There's some very specific guidelines that the IRS requires in order for them to qualify for the benefit of taking the profit or the equity out of that property and moving it to another property tax-free. Okay.
Mhm.
So, so we're talking about when you sell a commercial property or an income property, you're looking for an exchange which is considered like kind. So it has to be a like kind property. Doesn't mean that it actually has to be a duplex for a duplex or a commercial property for a commercial property, but we're talking about it being an income generating property. They call that a like kind property, okay? So that's the terminology as far as the property qualifying. So here are the guidelines for evaluating whether that property meets or not. So is it a like kind property? Is it an investment property? Are they deriving income off the property? If it's an income property, then it's a like kind property. The exchange has to be equal. The property that they're exchanging into has to be equal or greater value. If the property is lesser value than the property they're selling, then obviously there's going to be a residual, right? They're not going to use all of the equity. So the portion that's not used is now going to become taxable.
Could they split it and buy two different types of
Uh-huh.
properties?
Yeah, as long as they do it within the time frame designated. There's a very specific time frame. But yes, they could split it between a couple of properties. They just have to be identified.
Makes sense.
Okay. So like, for example, if you were selling an office let's say you're selling an apartment building and you wanted to go buy two fourplexes that were for sale. Yeah, you could do something like that. You're looking at the value. You want to have the replacement property cover the equity that you're taking out of the property.
Right.
Okay, so it has to be equal or greater. You must use a QI, which stands for qualified intermediary. This is very, very important. Very important. Your client has to use a QI, which is a qualified intermediary. That is a specific third party. There are QIs, and the only reason why QIs exist is that they facilitate 1031 exchanges. Now, here's the good news. That sounds a little ominous, right? QI, what's a QI? Well, A QI is a qualified intermediary, and most title companies have a division that handles 1031 exchanges. So they have a qualified intermediary as part of the title company. For example, Stewart Title. There's Stewart Title, and then there's Stewart QI, qualified intermediary. Okay. So they have an intermediary. So it's not your job to choose the intermediary, but it's your job to give them some options as to where they can find an intermediary. Zions Bank, also their finance department has a QI. They do 1031 exchanges. They're an intermediary. So the reason why that's important is this. You help your client sell their income property. So they may not have a property that they can exchange into immediately. They might still be looking for a property. Where does that money go? Until they actually purchase the replacement property.
But it needs to go into a trust.
So it goes to the QI, which is like a trust. It can't come to them. That's a disqualifying event. So if your seller sells that property and they take the money in, even for one day, they get disqualified. That money cannot come to them. Cannot. That's why it has to go to a QI. So that's why you have to have that set up before you close on the property, because the title company needs to pay the QI. Because the QI is an independent third party. And they hold that money until your client's ready to close on their replacement property. Any questions on that?
Huge.
That's very, very important. I can't tell you how many people don't know that. And then they sell a property, they put the money in an account, even a separate account. They'll open a separate account for that money, thinking that they're doing the right thing. But as long as they own that account, they've still disqualified themselves. Okay. Any questions on that? So then the intermediary helps with the 1031. The intermediary helps with the paperwork that's needed for the exchange. So they do this all day long. That's all they do is exchanges. So they help with the paperwork. They'll provide all the documentation that your client needs in order to take to the accountant in order to make sure that they get the tax benefits that they need on that. Okay, number 4. Your client has up to 45 days after they sell the property or while they're selling the property. So I have a situation right now where I have a client that I represent who is selling some of their property right now, their commercial property, to a business. We have not gone under contract yet. We're still in the LOI point where we're still negotiating the terms, but we're actively out looking for replacement properties because that is the hardest part of this whole scenario. And I want to say that again. This is the hardest part of this whole scenario, is finding a replacement property that they're happy with. And the reason being is that they have such limited time. They only have 45 days from the time that they sell the income property to identify the replacement property.
Question. So identify doesn't mean they close on that property.
No.
It just means, hey, this is the property we're working on to get
Yes.
under
So,
contract.
so there is an IRS form. Right here.
Okay.
Replacement property identification form. This is from the IRS. And there's the spot where you have to identify the 3 properties. Okay, if the property that your client does not ultimately end up closing on show up on this list, it doesn't qualify.
Oh, so you have 3 options.
You have 3 options, or you can have a total of 3 options. So property 1 you want to purchase maybe that only takes 50% of the qualification. Then they want to buy two other properties that are smaller properties that are 25% apiece. So as long as these three properties total up to 100% of the equity or the proceeds
Or more.
or more of the property, then you're okay. But they have to show up on this form. And it has to happen within the 45 days of them closing. It all hinges off the closing date. On the income property, okay?
So they would need to already essentially be under contract or close to being under
They
contract?
can be, don't have to be, but it would sure take the pressure off
Yeah.
if they could be under contract on the replacement property before they go under contract on the replacement property. So I don't know if I answered your question correctly, so
Oh.
say it again, so it makes sense.
Same track as I can be, but, so my question was, to qualify it as an identified property.
Mhm.
Ideally, you want to be already under contract, because if it's one of those three and that falls through, can you identify a different property at that point? Or
As
no?
long as you're within the 45 days,
But if 45 days has passed and one of those three falls through,
you're screwed.
you're screwed, okay.
Yeah, so on that list might fluctuate for 44 days. You may want to buy a property, but before you can get it under contract, somebody else gets it under contract, so that property falls off. So that list can be fluid, and actually, what most qualified intermediaries will do is they won't even fill that out until day 44.
Makes sense.
And then day 45, that's etched in concrete. That's your list. Now, you might ask yourself, well, what happens if all three of those properties fall through? What happens if two of them that we've identified get sold to somebody else? And the third one that they liked, they did not a home inspection, but they did an inspection on that property, and they didn't like the inspection, and the seller wouldn't correct what was wrong, and they decided not to go forward. So they lost the third property. Now what?
Yeah.
They're out.
They're out, they can't do it anymore.
Can't do it anymore.
It's risky.
They lose the option for the 1031 exchange.
Okay.
So any questions on that?
Could it be only one property?
Sure.
Okay, it doesn't have to be three, but you have up to three.
Yeah, but I would do three. I would have some backups.
Yeah.
There's one that your client, my experience has been, there's one that your client wants to go under contract on or has gone under contract on. And so that's their number one property, but you'd be foolish not to have a number two and a number three property as backups. Because things happen, right? And I would start looking for property, just like in this situation with my client. We're probably another week from going under contract. We've already negotiated that we'll close in 90 days from when we go under contract. So we know that we're going to close probably sometime in September. So I've got 90 days plus 45 days. So I've got 135 days to find them a replacement property. That's not much time. That goes like that. That's the biggest part of this, guys, is the stress that you're going to feel and that they're going to feel in making sure that they find an appropriate replacement property. Okay. All right. So let's say we get to day 45, we've identified our replacement property. So we have until 180 days after their settlement in order to close on the replacement property. Okay. So 6 months to close, 45 days to identify, 6 months to close on the replacement property. You can close sooner than that, but you have to close within those windows. Okay. So I want to talk to you about a second exchange. So we've talked about the residential exchange. We've talked about a commercial exchange. There's a third kind of exchange, which is called a reverse exchange. So the first one that we've talked about is where you sell the income property and you exchange that into the replacement property, okay? That's typically how that works. Is that you sell the income property and you exchange it into replacement property. There's another exchange which is called the reverse exchange. And I've done this one a few times with some clients. And so a reverse exchange is the same timeline. So instead of selling the income property and identifying a replacement and closing on the replacement, we close on the replacement property. We identify a property that we want to sell, and then we sell that property. Okay, so what we do is they buy the replacement property first. Okay.
Okay.
And then they take those proceeds from the income property to execute the exchange. So what that necessitates is somebody who has significant resources,
Yeah,
because they're paying cash, or I guess they could finance it. The people I've dealt with have all paid cash, but they can actually finance it, I guess, as long as they can qualify. But they close on the replacement property, they identify a property that they want to sell, they want to liquidate that property, they sell the property and then exchange those funds into the replacement property and basically get their money back,
got it.
okay?
But they would have to make sure they sell within 180 days.
Same thing, you have to identify what property they're going to sell, and then you have to close on that property within 180 days in order to exchange it into the other property.
So that's also still pressure because you gotta make sure it sells within 6
Yes,
months.
yeah. So in that case, price is gonna be king, right?
Yeah.
Everything sells, this is my motto, and it's not my motto exclusively, but it's the truth. Everything sells for the right price.
Yeah.
If you have a listing and it's not selling, what's the problem?
Too high price.
It might really be the condition, it might be the location, it might be the floor plan, maybe it has functional obsolescence. Does anybody know what functional obsolescence is?
The house is.
Yeah, yeah, so in this market, that can be as simple as a 2-bedroom home on the main level, because of the number of children that we have in Utah. Most people want 3 bedrooms on the same floor as the parents, because they don't want to send children down to the basement until they're 10 or 12 years old. So that extra bedroom, that 3rd bedroom, gives them the flexibility of letting the kids stay on the main floor with the parents for longer.
Yes.
2 bedrooms is considered functional obsolescence. So you can always correct anything that's wrong with a property with pricing, with the right pricing. Okay. So the other thing is that when you're helping your client in this process, you need to use this addendum right here. This needs to be attached to your purchase contract. Doesn't matter whether you're helping the seller or you're helping the buyer. This is the 1031 exchange addendum. And basically what it's saying is, hey, Mr. Buyer or Mr. Seller, whoever the party is on the opposite side of the transaction. So like with this property that we're going under contract with, hopefully next week, that's going to sell. I stipulated that as part of that, my client is doing a 1031 exchange. Okay. So what I did is I incorporated in the LOI this language right here in this first box. It says, seller desires to enter into this transaction and the sale of the property is a relinquished property under section 1031 of the Internal Revenue Code. Accordingly, the buyer, who's on the other side, so they're being represented by somebody else, agrees to fully cooperate with the seller in completing the exchange at no expense or liability to them.
Essentially, you're telling the buyer, hey, help us with these deadlines.
Yes,
Make sure you complete them.
it has everything to do with deadlines.
Okay.
You're saying to them, hey, we're doing an exchange. We have 45 days, you know, that
Do
we,
your part.
yeah, so we need you to cooperate with us in the exchange. And the same thing for the buyer. If the buyer, so if you're representing a buyer, then this says buyer desires to enter into this transaction to acquire the property as a suitable like-kind exchange under the 1031 tax code. Accordingly, seller agrees to fully cooperate with the buyer in completing the exchange at no expense or liability to them. So there again, it's just a timing thing. Hey, if we come to you and say, hey, we need to move up closing 5 days, 10 days in order to stay within our window, you will do that. You will cooperate with us in order to accomplish the exchange, okay? Or if we need to push back on the timing, you're going to cooperate with us. So it's a timing thing. That's why you have this addendum as part of the contract, so that they know what you're trying to do. You're trying to accomplish this transaction in a specific amount of time.
Makes sense.
Okay. Any questions on this? You guys that are online? So remember to have your 1031 exchange addendum so that everybody's informed. This is a disclosure document. Really doesn't have anything to do from a financial standpoint. It's just disclosing to all parties that this is a 1031 exchange. Therefore, there are certain time constraints that either the buyer or the seller may be under. And a lot of times with these kinds of properties, both parties are under a time crunch. Both of them have this disclosure saying, hey, I'm trying to buy this property as a replacement property for my exchange. And then the seller's trying to do the same thing. They're trying to sell the property and exchange into another property to protect that money. Okay. So let's just go through a transaction so that you can understand how that will go. So you list the property. Property goes under contract. Property sells. Okay. Where does the money go?
To the Q1.
Goes to
QI.
the QI. Okay. Very important. It must go to a QI. If it goes to your seller, they're disqualified. So it has to go to a QI. So if I were you, before you're put in that situation, I would ask the title company that you do business with, hey, do you have a QI? Do you have a 1031 department? A lot of them do. Zions Bank does a good job. They have a 1031 department. I use them. They're not the cheapest. They're not the easiest to work with. Zions is Zions, but they're very good at what they do. So there is a cost associated with the QI. You're going to pay somewhere around $1,500 for their services, for them to take the money in, hold it in trust, help you with the identification documentation that's needed, the closing documentation on the replacement property, and all of the documentation that you need to take to your accountant to justify the exchange.
Could you use that cost as part of that exchange in the sense of like, this is a cost associated with it, therefore it gets subtracted from how much I need to put into the next property?
I don't think so.
No, it's just a cost up front that you need to have.
It's a cost of closing. It's going to come out. It's going to come out of the closing.
Okay,
So it's going to be shown as a fee. So the title company, the QI is not going to close the transaction, but they're going to provide documentation and verification to the title company that does close it. And as part of that, there's going to be a line item for your client that's going to say intermediary QI and the cost of their services. I've seen as little as $500 and I've seen as much as $2,000, but I think the average is probably somewhere around, $1,000 to $1,500 that service. It's money well spent, and they do a great job typically of keeping you out of trouble, keeping you qualified, let me say that.
Yeah.
Their job is to keep you qualified to the best of their ability. Now, if you miss your deadlines, that's on you.
Right.
But as long as you hit your deadlines, they're gonna make sure that you're compliant with paperwork and everything you need that way. That is it. Other than, here's just a sample letter. They give you when their client engages with them, they give them this engagement letter that spells out everything. They have to identify in 45 days. It cites the tax code for that. And then the identification process, they explain about that. And then they provide this document, which is the identification form. And that's where the 3 properties are listed. Okay,
And where do you get this from?
the QI provides it. Okay. Any questions? Rebuttals?
I mean, it sounds like a stressful process, but if you're up to your deadlines and you're doing your part, it could clearly work in the benefit of your client.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of stressful. I mean, I'm a little anxious already. And I'm not even under contract on the commercial property. And the reason is the market is so tight. It's tight residentially, but it's also tight commercially. Unless you're looking at office space, there's a glut of office space out there. But if you're looking at industrial space, which is what my client is selling, and they want to replace that with another industrial space, it's almost impossible. Very hard. Very few industrial properties on the market. There are some retail spaces, but they don't want retail. So it does get a little stressful. But as long as you know in advance what the timing is, then you can kind of plan for it. I've already sent them a half a dozen properties already to consider as a replacement property, and we're not even under contract yet. And that's kind of what you need to do.
Yeah, you need to be one step ahead.
Yeah, need to be very proactive with that.
Thanks.
And also have them help you. Don't let it all fall on you. Give them a LoopNet to look at. Give them, CoStar. You can, anybody can go in and look at CoStar. You don't get to see the most current properties with those 2 services unless you're an agent and you're paying for the service. And it's expensive. It's like $750 a month to have access to the commercial MLS. But anybody can go on and look at stuff that's older, over 30 days old, 60 days old. You can see that stuff. Now, how valuable is that if a property is already on the market after 30 or 60 days? The good properties go quick. Right. So, you got to be really proactive with that. Set up your searches, be proactive, send out emails to commercial brokers. Hey, this is what I'm looking for. If you have something that comes up that fits that description, let me know. I've done that to commercial brokers, and I've had 2 or 3 reach out to me and say, hey, I've got this coming up. And that's been really helpful.
That's good.
So work a network. Don't rely upon stuff coming to you passively. Go out and actively search for it. Contact commercial brokers, send them emails, go out and drive areas. Say, where would you want your property to be? And if they identify an area, go out and drive that area and look for properties that they're looking for that match that description, and then approach the property owners, just like you do when you go out and knock doors in a neighborhood. You can go out and knock businesses too. Sometimes the property owner is not the business owner. So in that case, I don't do a lot of that, but I do send out letters to the registered owner on the county records.
Because you never know, they could be just thought already to start selling it, and then you come in and then like, oh.
And everything's for sale for the right price. Yeah.
I do have one final question.
Mhm.
I know we're almost out of time, but can a 1031 exchange work on foreign land? Like if you were to sell your property here and
Invested overseas.
invest it overseas?
Boy, that's a great question. I've never been asked that question before. let me talk to my QI that I use and try to get that answer for you. I think it would. I think it would, as long as you met the deadline.
I think it would also depend on possibly the country. Because I know, for example, Japan, they treat foreigners with the same right as citizens to purchase property.
Yep.
But in some places in Europe as well, because they need to repopulate.
Yeah,
And I don't know if there'd be stricter rules on other areas.
there are, like in Mexico, you can't own property, in certain areas in Mexico.
That's true.
If you're not a naturalized citizen.
Mm.
So there are restrictions. So yeah, that's going to apply. And then the conversion rate too, you know, you gotta make sure that when you complete the conversion of the money, that the conversion is equal to or greater than the exchange.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. So there's that part of it too, calculating the benefit of the exchange based on the exchange rate.
Great.
Okay. All right, thank you for being here, everybody. Any last questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times? Okay, gone. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ken.